I'm Liz Forbliss, and this is Currents. It's finally here, the Fortnight for Freedom, and Baltimore Archbishop William Lori joins me to talk about it. Plus, the HHS mandate is placing healthcare workers in a bind.
Nobody should be forced to violate their conscience, that innermost part of their soul which tells them what's right and what's wrong and to make those judgments.
And it's a unique new pro-life ministry for former abortion clinic workers. Good evening and thank you for joining us. Starting today, Catholic groups across the nation embark on a 2-week campaign of prayer vigils, rallies, and other events to draw attention to what they consider government attacks on religious freedom, the highly anticipated Fortnight for Freedom. Organized by U.S. bishops, the campaign includes protests against state laws and policies. However, the immediate target is the mandate President Barack Obama announced in January that will force most employers, including some religious organizations, to provide health insurance that covers birth control, sterilization, and abortion-inducing drugs in their employee health plans. Now, the Fortnight for Freedom campaign launches with a mass celebrated by Archbishop William Lori at the nation's first cathedral, the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Assumption in Baltimore. Earlier, I spoke to Archbishop Lori, who heads the U.S. Bishops' Committee on Religious Liberty. The Archbishop addressed the importance of the Fortnight, what led us to this point, and what lies ahead in this battle to raise awareness and preserve religious consciousness. Archbishop Lori, it's such a pleasure to speak with you. We were just talking about how excited we are about the fact that the Fortnight for Freedom is finally here. You and your brother bishops have been planning this event for quite some time. Now, what do you hope will be accomplished by this momentous effort? And I call it an effort just to drive home the significance of the event.
Well, Liz, you're right to call it an effort. And there's really two things we have in mind. Number one, in these 14 days leading up to the 4th of July, we're hoping that we'll gather in prayer. Tonight we'll gather in prayer nationally at the Basilica of the Assumption in Baltimore. We'll close the Fortnight at the National Shrine in Washington with a large mass as well. And in between time, there will be prayer in parishes, in homes and parts of on the part of individuals. So prayer is number one. The Lord said, without me you can do nothing. And so if we want to preserve religious liberty, we have to pray and get the strength and the enlightenment to do so. Secondly, education. There is so much to appreciate about the Church's teaching on religious liberty, and there is so much that we need to learn or maybe relearn about our heritage as Americans. And what better time to do this than in the run-up to Independence Day.
Absolutely, and Archbishop, dioceses across the nation planning their own activities. Now, in the spirit of unity, are there specific aspects of the program designed to be the same from state to state? For instance, will there be certain prayers? Will there be certain hymns or homilies that will just span across national lines?
There will be. For example, there is a prayer for religious liberty that the Bishops' Conference has published. It's really a beautiful prayer, various kinds of very nice prayer cards and things of that nature. And so that's number one. Number two, a lot of homily helps. It's never good to have a canned homily, but it is good, and I'm speaking as a homilist myself, to receive some guidance, some points to incorporate into homilies. There are model prayer services, and of course, there is a lot of educational information that's available. But there's also, and this is really very good, a tremendous amount of creativity in the dioceses around the United States. Their plans for the Fortnight can be found on the Fortnight for Freedom website, and I think there's probably 80 or so dioceses that are showing us what they're doing. It's pretty exciting, I'd say.
And Archbishop, I would be remiss if I did not talk about the catalyst for Fortnight and an issue that you have been very vocal on. Now, we're expecting the Supreme Court to hand down a decision on Obamacare, and of course, part of that, the controversial HHS mandate by the end of the month. There are so many possible scenarios, Archbishop. Ultimately, what if the High Court decides not to strike down any part of Obamacare as unconstitutional? Where do we go from there?
One thing to remember is that in the middle of May, a number of Catholic dioceses, universities, hospitals, and publishing houses like our Sunday Visitor filed suit all around the country, specifically focused on the Health and Human Services mandate. And so I think our issue would still be very much alive because unlike the claims that have been made so far, we are making a First Amendment claim. And so I don't think I'm not a lawyer, of course, but I think that these lawsuits would be all the more important.
And Archbishop, while the mandate is certainly a focus of the Church's concerns, I would like you to explain, this is not the only presumed slight on religious liberty by the government. I mean, this call to action is not simply to address one issue. What else is being addressed? How big is this concern?
Oh, there's a lot of things. For example, we have something called Migration Refugee Services, and it belongs to the Church. It's a great organization that helps victims of human trafficking. We've done a great job, but we're being discriminated against in applying for government contracts because we don't do abortions and we don't hand out condoms. Another thing would be that many, in various states, Catholic adoption and foster care agencies have been driven out of business by the government because they won't place kids with same-sex couples. In Alabama, there's a law which penalizes churches for providing services, Good Samaritan services, to the undocumented. So there are many, many threats to religious liberty. Most of them are at the state level, but the HHS mandate is the first time the federal government has sought in recent memory to reach inside the Church and try to force us to violate our teaching.
Thank you, Archbishop. I'm so happy that you were able to broaden the scope of the Fortnight for Freedom in that answer. How can the faithful participate in this show of unity? Who should they contact?
First of all, perhaps go on the website of your diocese, see what activities have been planned, and take part in those. Number two, this is something families can do. How important for families to pray together, and how important for parents to educate their children about religious liberty. What a patriotic thing to do. Another thing that ought to happen, I think, is that we should stay in constant touch with our elected representatives, remind them that we, as citizens, expect them to defend our religious liberties, not to compromise them and not to roll them back.
That is the perfect last word. I really do want to thank you for spending some time with us today to talk to us about the significance of the Fortnight for Freedom, which gets underway tonight. And we'll be watching. We'll be airing the Mass right here on NET. Thank you once again.
All right. Thanks a million, Liz, and thanks to all your listeners.
You're very welcome. And again, Thursday night, 7 o'clock, here on NET, we will bring you the Mass from the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Assumption in Baltimore, celebrated by Archbishop Laurie. That's coming up straight after the show. Here in Brooklyn, a special Mass will be celebrated on Friday night at 7 p.m. at St. Joseph's Church in Prospect Heights. Stay tuned. There's more currents ahead. The rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Liz Faubles. Pope Benedict is calling for an end to bloodshed and violence in Syria. Rome Reports has more.
The Pope is concerned about the security and safety of Christians in the Middle East. He made this point during his annual meeting with the Reunion of Organizations for Aid to the Oriental Churches. The Pope made a pledge to support those areas, especially now, following the instability of the Arab Spring.
Above all, it is my hope that you will persevere in that moment of charity which by papal mandate the congregation oversees, so that the Holy Land and the other eastern regions may receive material and spiritual support.
The Pope specifically talked about Syria by saying that his thoughts and prayers are with those who are suffering through the country's violence, especially the young and defenseless. He also called on them to not lose faith in this moment of darkness and to continue their fraternity in Christ so that all violence and bloodshed may end.
In these words, I expressed myself 5 years ago while visiting the dicastery for Eastern churches, and I now wish to reiterate firmly that same exhortation so as to underline the urgent needs of the present moment.
The Pope also made an appeal to assist those who have fled their homes in hopes of finding shelter and protection in neighboring countries. He then finished the meeting by asking the Virgin Mary to look over him in his coming trip to Lebanon, which will take place from September 14th to the 16th.
Christians make up 10% of Syria's population. And at least one Syrian bishop is hopeful about the future of his country. Chaldean Bishop Antoine Audo tells Catholic news agency that the country still has a chance for peace. The bishop says the country can move in the direction of civil war or toward, quote, reform with rationality, with sincerity, with determination. He's urging Catholics worldwide to keep Syria in their prayers. Back in this country, have Americans become less generous when it comes to religious charities? The annual Giving USA report released this week shows that donations to religious bodies has dropped by 1.7%. This is the second year in a row that the amount of money given toward religious organizations has decreased. Robert Evans of Giving USA says the proportion of charitable donations going to religious groups has been falling steadily for decades. Evans points to several possible reasons for this, including the fall in church attendance and increased competition from non-religious organizations. Stay tuned. There's more currents ahead. Coming up, religious employers are not the only ones affected by the HHS mandate.
Healthcare workers are being forced and coerced to violate their conscience. And of course, the mandate, the HHS mandate, is just that writ large.
Welcome back. Much of the focus of the opposition to the Health and Human Services mandate has been on the religious employers who would be forced to violate their consciences. But they are not the only ones who would be placed in a bind because of the mandate. The healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, and other practitioners are also, in many cases, being forced to act against their deeply held beliefs. Is it right for the government to force these healthcare professionals to leave their faith and their consciences at the door? And what can these doctors and nurses do to defend their rights? The Dominican Friars Healthcare Ministry recently provided an opportunity for the healthcare community to get some answers. The organization hosted a talk at St. Catherine of Siena Church in Manhattan with a man who understands the issues at hand.
How did a country that was founded on religious freedom and freedom of conscience, and it was such a vital element, why is it hard to get legislatures to understand this principle?
People are coming here today to come and listen to Nicholas Nickus, who's the president of the Bioethics Defense Fund, talk about religious liberty. They feel that their liberties are in danger, and they want to do everything that they can to defend them.
People who founded this country came to the United States because of the desire for religious liberty and liberty of conscience. Nobody should be forced to violate their conscience, that innermost part of their soul which tells them what's right and what's wrong, and to make those judgments. Healthcare workers are being forced and coerced to violate their conscience. And of course, the mandate, the HHS mandate, is just that writ large, okay, coercion in general. Healthcare workers do have rights of conscience. They should always practice consistent with their beliefs and their faith. No one should force them to violate their conscience. They stand within the mainstream of American life in asking for their conscience to be respected, because that's how they will provide the best care for their patients. We have gone in American law since 1973 with Roe v. Wade. First it was, you don't have to ever participate. Just give us the right to have the abortion. You can stay clear of it. Then it was forcing physicians and others to participate in the evil. And now we've come even further with the mandate that says not only do you participate, we all have to pay for it. This is really not just about the healthcare workers themselves, but their patients. If you can use your gifts in the medical field consistent with your conscience, you're actually helping those patients who have a desire to have doctors and nurses and pharmacists and medical students who reflect their values and their beliefs.
For my own insurance, for example, if that was going to be mandated that we would continue to pay for abortions, then that would directly violate what I believe.
I mean, what else is there except to try to live a life that conforms to the truth?
If an American can't practice their religion in this country and stand up against what we think is against our religion, then who's next? And we need to speak up and defend our rights as practicing Catholics.
The ability to object to something that you find immoral is central to the entire American experiment, what we are as Americans, and also, even deeper than that, what we are as just human beings. It's a fundamental right that's unassailable.
Every human being has a human nature, and our human nature guarantees that we have the right to practice consistently with our faith and our beliefs.
Stay tuned, we have more currents ahead. When we return, it's a chance at a new start for former abortion clinic workers. Finally tonight, a study published in this month's issue of the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology claims that giving birth to a child is 14 times more dangerous than having an abortion. The study's authors claim that an increasing use of pharmaceutical rather than surgical abortions contributes to much safer abortions. But one advocate for women's health says the study has a number of flaws. Priscilla Coleman, a professor of human development and family studies at Bowling Green State University, says the study is, quote, a dangerous distortion based on seriously incomplete data. Among the issues Coleman raises, the reliance on government data, despite the fact that abortion reporting is not required by federal law and that many states do not report abortion-related deaths. One woman who was on the front lines of the abortion industry but is now firmly pro-life is Abby Johnson. The former Planned Parenthood director told her story in her 2011 book, Unplanned. Johnson recently started a new ministry for other abortion clinic workers who have had a change of heart. I recently had a chance to talk about that with her. Abby, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Abby, you have said that Planned Parenthood put your pro-life beliefs in the spotlight, and it has been a journey since then. You have indeed had quite a journey since leaving Planned Parenthood. You wrote a book, you're launching your nonprofit organization. But before we get to that, tell me, mentally, how did you prepare for the decision to leave Planned Parenthood after nearly a decade of being with the company?
Well, I mean, you know, whenever I decided that I needed to leave, it just came pretty naturally. I just knew that I had to get out of the abortion industry. You know, I'm not going to say it was an easy transition. It was not. I, you know, left all of my friends. My, you know, primary support system, I mean, was the people that I was around all the time. And so I was, you know, I was scared to leave. I didn't know how Planned Parenthood would react. I certainly didn't think they would react like they did. But I was very nervous. We went to a church that was really progressive and liberal, and after I left, I was told, you know, we couldn't go back to that church because I was no longer pro-choice. So, I mean, a lot of things turned upside down in my life in a very short period of time. Mm-hmm. And so it is hard. I mean, it's hard. It was hard for me to leave. It's hard for all clinic workers to leave. Just that fear of the unknown. I didn't know where my next paycheck was going to come from. Mm-hmm. But I had enough strength in God and enough faith that it kind of been a foundation for me growing up, that I knew that I would be taken care of if I just did the right thing.
And it certainly does sound very life-changing. Now here you are On June 4th, you're going to be launching your And Then There Were None nonprofit organization, and it ministers specifically to abortion clinic workers. First, tell us about the stream of consciousness that inspired the idea for this organization.
Well, I knew that when I left Planned Parenthood, I was going to have, I knew when I started getting into the movement that, I was going to eventually work with clinic workers. There is no ministry for clinic workers out there. We have hundreds and hundreds of ministries out there for women who have had abortions, men who have had abortions, women who are pregnant, but we have nothing out there nationally for clinic workers who have left or who have a desire to leave the industry. And so I knew that was something that I wanted to do. I knew that was something that I was feeling called to do, but felt very overwhelmed, just not knowing how a nonprofit works, not knowing how to get it set up. And so I just, started praying about it, and I started having clinic workers contact me. They had read my book, they had heard my story, things like that, and they were contacting me and asking me if I would be willing to help them leave because they had similar sorts of feelings that I did. And so I did. I started doing that just kind of on a one-on-one basis with these women and men that were contacting me. And within 4 months, I had 17 workers that had contacted me that wanted to leave. Okay. And so I said, okay, I guess this is it. I guess this is God giving me a big push into this ministry. And so just started really praying about it and rallying people together to pray about, how this was going to move forward. And things just started falling into place, and it's been amazing just to see the transformation in these people's lives.
And Abby, quickly, you mentioned that you wrote a book published a year ago called Unplanned. What was the hardest part about writing that book?
I think the hardest part of writing that book, the hardest part of what I do now is reliving the evil that I was a part of. And just, looking at that and putting it down on paper. I mean, for me, it's very healing, even to expose myself in that way. But it's hard to look back and say, oh my gosh, I was involved in these terrible things.
Mm-hmm. And what has been the reaction from friends and from people who are now your opponents, the pro-choice camp, about the new nonprofit, the book, your change of heart? It hasn't been very positive from the other side, but that's what I expected. I mean, my goal is conversion. My goal is, conversion of women who are considering abortion, conversion of clinic workers, conversion of politicians, conversion certainly of people that are on the pro-choice side. I mean, and so I just have to remember the way that I was reached out to by the pro-life movement was with love and compassion and care and mercy. And so that's how we as a movement need to reach out to those that maybe are on opposing sides. And Abby, in the time we have left, when you think back on your time at Planned Parenthood, is it more about any regrets or is it more about lessons?
It's more about lessons. I made a decision to basically, give everything that I had done, give over all of my sin to God and say, you know what, you do with it what you would like, and if you can use it for your glory, then please do that. And I feel like that's what he's been able to do. And I just look back and say, you know what, I don't know why I was there, but I know that it's God's will that I'm not and that I'm speaking out against abortion.
All right, Abby, thank you. That's the final word. We wish you so much luck with all your endeavors, and thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed our discussion. Have a great day. And that is all for tonight. Be sure to join us again on Friday for more on the Fortnight for Freedom in the Diocese of Brooklyn and across the country. And be sure to stay right where you are, coming straight ahead here on net, live from the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Assumption in Baltimore, Thursday's Mass to kick off the Fortnight for Freedom. And just a reminder that on Friday night, a special Mass will also be celebrated here in Brooklyn at St. Joseph's Church in Prospect Heights. Now that starts at 7 p.m. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Liz Faubles. We leave you with sights and sounds of the Religious Freedom Rally on Wall Street earlier this month. Thank you for watching and have a good night.